Imagine, for a moment, the war wasn't fought on distant battlefields or stormy seas, but in a quiet, anonymous office building in Washington, D.C., and the soldiers were not men in uniform, but thousands of young women in skirts and heels. They were the silent architects of victory, holding the fate of every battleship, every troop transport, and every major invasion in the palm of their hands. Yet their names would never appear in the headlines. They were the Codebreakers, and the astonishing truth of how America won the war was locked within their secret, diligent work. The year was 1942. Pearl Harbor was a fresh, agonizing wound, and the United States was reeling, frantically scrambling to catch up to the technological and tactical sophistication of the Axis powers. The war was brutal, but one battle was being fought in utter silence, a battle for information superiority for the enemy's secrets. The demand for codebreakers was astronomical. A sudden, desperate need for thousands of minds capable of shattering the complex, nearly unbreakable ciphers of the Japanese and German war machines. The male talent pool was quickly depleted by combat demands, leading to a revolutionary, almost accidental decision: the recruitment of American women. Across the country, recruiters, many of them college math professors, physicists, and linguists, were given a single, top-secret directive: find the sharpest female minds in America. They swept through elite women's colleges like Smith and Vassar and large state universities, looking for young women with a passion for logic puzzles, a gift for languages, and a flawless grasp of mathematics. One of these recruits was a 20-year-old mathematics major from a small college in Kansas named Agnes Meyer. She was brilliant, introverted, and had a knack for seeing patterns where others saw only noise. Her letter of invitation was cryptic, delivered by a solemn-looking man in a plain suit. It spoke only of a confidential government position requiring advanced analytical skills in Washington, D.C. The salary was decent, the chance to serve the country was compelling, and the mystery was irresistible. She told her parents she was going to work as a civil service clerk. This deception would last for decades. Agnes arrived in Washington, D.C., to find a city sweltering under the wartime pressure, its buildings suddenly swelling with military and civilian personnel. Her assignment took her to the heart of the secret war, a drab, functional structure known only as Building 3, a sprawling, nondescript government complex that housed the new military intelligence operation. She was one of thousands of young women, mostly in their late teens and early 20s, who descended upon the capital. They came from every state and background: farm girls, debutantes, teachers, librarians, but they all shared a singular, formidable, intellectual capacity. They were not called codebreakers, a term too dramatic and precise for the need for secrecy. They were simply referred to by the innocuous title of cryptographic analysts, or, most commonly, WAVES, Women Accepted for Volunteer Emergency Service, and WACS, Women's Army Corps, attached to the Army Signal Corps. The scale of the operation was staggering. These women worked in 3 primary, highly segregated centers, each devoted to a different enemy. Arlington Hall Station, Army Signal Corps, focused primarily on breaking Japanese Army codes and diplomatic ciphers. The Naval Communications Annex, Washington, D.C., the legendary center of Station Hypo, later known as the Communication Supplementary Activity, COMSUPACT, which would eventually shatter the most crucial Japanese naval codes, including the famous JN-25. Bletchley Park, England, with U.S. liaisons, where a select group of American analysts worked side by side with the British to break the German Enigma machine. Agnes was assigned to Arlington Hall, a former girls' finishing school that had been hastily converted into a fortress of silence and computation. The atmosphere was a surreal mix of a college dormitory and a high-security military installation. The women lived, ate, and worked in near total isolation. They took the oath of secrecy, a pledge so severe that it stipulated they would never speak of their work, not even to their parents, husbands, or children, for the rest of their lives. Agnes's first assignment was the Japanese 97-type machine cipher, which the Americans nicknamed JA, Japanese Army. This was not a simple substitution cipher. It was a sophisticated, mechanical creation that produced millions of possible key settings. The raw material, the intercepted messages, were columns of seemingly random 5-digit groups: 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, quad 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, quad 6, 7, 8, 9, 0, quad 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, quad 0, 9, 8, 7, 6, quad dots. The entire war effort hinged on turning those numbers into actionable intelligence. Agnes's team was deep in the traffic analysis section. Their job was not to read the content, but to study the patterns of the enemy's communications. They recorded who was talking to whom, how frequently, and the length of the messages. This metadata was often as valuable as the message content itself. A sudden increase in messages between Tokyo and a distant island base, or a change in the length of routine weather reports, could signal an imminent attack. Agnes, armed with graph paper, slide rules, and her relentless eye for detail, spent 12-hour shifts compiling these records. She was a human data processor in a time before computers. In the intense heat of the Washington summer, hunched over her desk, she once noticed a subtle anomaly in the JA traffic. The Japanese military often used a 2-letter prefix for messages originating from their Imperial General Headquarters, IGHQ. Agnes realized that the frequency of these prefixes was not random. Certain characters appeared more often on Mondays and others on Fridays. This seemingly minor detail, a flicker of human inefficiency in a massive mechanical system, was a potential key. She brought her findings to her commanding officer, a gruff Navy commander, who was initially dismissive of a young lady's hunch. But Agnes had meticulously compiled 2 months of data, demonstrating a statistically significant correlation. Her observation was passed to the cryptographic section, the elite group that worked on the mathematical breakdown of the machine itself. It was this tiny, almost invisible crack, the non-random distribution of IGHQ prefixes, that provided the critical crib, or piece of known plaintext, needed to unlock a major operational setting on the JA machine. The resulting break didn't just decode one message. It allowed the analysts to begin reading thousands of Japanese Army messages, planning troop movements, logistical supply lines, and anti-aircraft placements on dozens of Pacific islands. The intelligence derived from this breach was codenamed Magic. It was the highest-level secret of the war, shared only among the president, a handful of top generals, and the handful of cryptographers who produced it. It was the intelligence that forewarned the U.S. command of the Japanese preparations for the Guadalcanal campaign, allowing the Americans to be waiting for them rather than reacting to a surprise attack. Agnes, like her thousands of colleagues, never saw the battlefield, never heard the gunshots, and never received public recognition. She simply continued her work, shift after shift, fueling the American war machine with the most vital resource, foresight. But the story of these women goes far beyond just the Pacific theater. At the Naval Communications Annex, another group of waves worked on the almost mythical Japanese naval code, JN-25. It was the most complex cipher the Japanese possessed, and its successful break was the single most pivotal intelligence achievement of the entire war. The key figures who broke JN-25, the ones who confirmed the exact date and target of the Japanese attack on Midway Island, were initially a team of civilian and naval analysts, but the overwhelming, continuous work of deciphering every message that followed was carried by hundreds of young women. They spent their days in small, windowless rooms, surrounded by humming teleprinters and massive filing cabinets, literally sorting the war out on paper. Each woman would be assigned a portion of a message, a single 5-digit group. and they would test hundreds of possible key additives, the randomly generated component that obscured the true message, against known Japanese vocabulary and grammar, using slide rules and sheer brute force intellect. It was excruciating, painstaking work, an assembly line of genius, where one missed digit or one exhausted mistake could cost a ship or 1,000 lives. A Waves lieutenant named Dorothy Tittle, one of the section heads at the Naval Annex, would walk the long rows of desks, listening to the monotonous tapping of pencils. She estimated that by 1944, over 10,000 women were serving as cryptologic personnel in the Navy and Army, combined, a number far exceeding the total number of men in any single combat division. The intelligence they provided at Midway, the foreknowledge of the Japanese battle plan, did not just help win the battle, it guaranteed the victory, sinking 4 Japanese carriers and decisively turning the tide of the war in the Pacific. Admiral Chester Nimitz, commander of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, would later acknowledge that the code-breaking effort was worth a whole battle fleet.
And yet, when the war ended, their service was immediately, aggressively redacted from history. Their offices were cleared, their files were stamped top secret, and they were sent home with one final, chilling directive: forget everything you did here. Agnes Meyer returned to Kansas, finished her degree, and became a high school math teacher. For decades, when asked what she did in the war, she would smile and say, "Oh, I was just a clerk in Washington." She would watch documentaries about World War II, knowing that the most significant part of the story was missing, that the men being hailed as heroes were acting on information that she and her thousands of silent sisters had broken, often working 16-hour shifts, powered by coffee and patriotic duty. This deliberate erasure created one of the most astonishing historical paradoxes of the 20th century. A massive, coordinated, and utterly decisive contribution to a global war effort that remained completely invisible for nearly 50 years. The silence was so profound that many of the women themselves began to doubt their own memory, wondering if their time in the locked-down buildings had been nothing more than a fever dream. Their full story, the depth of their technical brilliance, the staggering scale of their organizational effort, and the countless American lives their intelligence saved, is a hidden chapter of American history, a quiet war won by the sharpest minds the nation had to offer, minds that were almost lost to history forever. Agnes Meyer, now deep into her 3rd year at Arlington Hall, felt the immense weight of the secret war pressing down on her. The initial rush of patriotic fervor had given way to a grinding, methodical routine. Yet, every now and then, a monumental breakthrough would shatter the monotony and remind them all of the stakes. After her crucial work in traffic analysis, Agnes was elevated to a small, prestigious team focused on the ultimate prize, the Japanese diplomatic cipher Makin.
This was not a naval or army code. It was the mechanism used by the Japanese Foreign Office to communicate with its embassies worldwide, including Berlin and Washington, D.C. If broken, Purple offered a direct window into the highest levels of Axis strategy, alliance negotiations, and strategic military intentions before they were formalized into military orders. It was the geopolitical crystal ball. The genius behind Breaking Purple belonged largely to a brilliant civilian cryptographer named William Friedman, who, alongside a small team, had successfully reverse-engineered the complex mechanical components of the Japanese machine without ever seeing the physical device. They had literally built a duplicate machine, piece by piece, based only on the intercepted encrypted messages. This American-made machine, used to decrypt the Purple traffic, was known as the Magic Machine. Agnes and her team of analysts, most of them Waves, were tasked with keeping the Magic Machine running. The machine was complex, prone to error, and required constant human oversight and correction, especially when the Japanese changed their rotor settings, the key. Their daily output was the foundation of the Magic Intelligence Summaries, the Secret Alliance. One blistering hot morning in 1944, a high-priority Purple intercept landed on Agnes's desk. It was an exceptionally long message from the Japanese ambassador in Berlin to Tokyo. Agnes, using the decryption settings of the day, fed the ciphertext into the Magic Machine. The resulting plain text was not about logistics or troop deployment. It was a candid, detailed assessment of the German war effort delivered by the Japanese ambassador Oshima to his superiors. Oshima, who had unprecedented access to Hitler and the top German military brass, was, ironically, the single most valuable spy the Allies possessed. This particular message revealed two astonishing, interconnected facts. Germany's V-weapon program, Oshima reported on the progress of a terrifying new weapon, a pilotless aircraft, the V-1 flying bomb, and a long-range rocket, the V-2. He provided details on their operational range, the location of test sites near Peenemünde, and the imminent plan for their deployment against London. The Atlantic U-boat strategy. Oshima's assessment included a detailed analysis of the U-boat Wolfpack tactics in the North Atlantic. He referenced specific rendezvous points and the resupply schedules of the massive Type 9 U-boats. The German U-boat menace had been, since 1939, the single greatest threat to the Allies. Convoys carrying supplies, food, and troops from America to Britain were being decimated, and Britain was on the verge of starvation. The Navy, operating out of Washington, D.C., had been working desperately to break the German naval code, Enigma, the naval connection. While Agnes's team was focused on Japanese codes, magic, the information they occasionally uncovered about the Germans was priceless. The Navy's cryptanalysis section, led by Captain Joseph Rockefort and later Captain Lawrence Safford, focused intensely on the Enigma. The Enigma machine was an electromechanical cipher device that used a keyboard and a set of 3, later 4, movable rotors to encrypt messages. The British at Bletchley Park had famously broken the main Enigma settings, an intelligence coup codenamed Ultra. However, the German Navy used a much tougher version, adding a 4th rotor and changing the settings frequently, creating a blackout known as Black May in 1943, where they temporarily lost the ability to read U-boat traffic. This is where the quiet coordination between magic, Japanese intelligence, and ultra, German intelligence, became critical. Agnes's Purple Intercept, Oshima's report, was instantly forwarded to the Naval Intelligence Unit. The key detail was, they were able to run a targeted computational attack, eventually leading to the capture of a U-boat U-505 later in the war, which contained an intact Enigma machine and codebooks, an unparalleled intelligence coup. More immediately, Oshima's intelligence provided the U.S. Navy with the necessary confidence to divert resources. It confirmed that the current U-boat strategy was focused on these vulnerable rendezvous points. The U.S. Navy launched highly successful anti-submarine attacks on the Milk Cow fleet, sinking several critical supply vessels. The impact was immediate and measurable. U-boat sinkings plummeted. The ability to track and intercept the U-boats not only saved countless ships and lives, but also ensured the successful logistical buildup for D-Day. Without the flow of American material across the Atlantic, the Normandy invasion would have been impossible. Agnes Meyer, the quiet Kansas girl, had played a supporting but vital role in both the Pacific and Atlantic theaters, all from a desk in Washington, D.C. She had helped confirm the threat of the V-2 rockets, allowing the Allies to prioritize bombing of the Peenemünde test sites, and she had helped solve the crucial riddle of the U-boat war. The return to silence. By early 1945, the victory was certain, but the secrecy intensified. As the analysts worked through the final Japanese messages, they learned of the desperate, fanatic defense the enemy was planning for the Japanese mainland. Intelligence that directly informed President Truman's calculus regarding the use of the atomic bomb. When the bombs were dropped and the war finally ended, the silence imposed on Agnes and her colleagues became absolute. On her last day at Arlington Hall, Agnes turned in her badge, her notebooks, and her code-stamped pencil. A naval lieutenant shook her hand and said, "Thank you, Miss Meyer. You served your country well. Remember your oath." She walked out into the celebratory crowds of Washington, D.C., feeling utterly disconnected. The whole city was celebrating the triumph of the Army and Navy, the pilots and the Marines. Agnes was a ghost. She knew exactly how close the world had come to defeat, and she knew the thousands of small, unseen miracles, the patterns she had spotted, the numbers she had tallied, the sheer intellectual labor of her peers that had saved the day. But she couldn't share it. She couldn't celebrate her victory. She was 24 years old, a veteran of the war's most critical front, and she had to pretend she had spent the last 3 years shuffling papers. The next challenge for Agnes and the 10,000 women like her would be the longest, and perhaps the most difficult. Living a normal life while carrying the monumental, untold truth of victory in utter silence for the next half-century.